Okay, everybody. Okay, I guess I'll wait a second to see if I get some people that pop in. Regardless, I'll be recording this for any of you who do happen to come by. And so what we're looking at here today is the review for the content for Units 3 and 4 of AP European History, okay? And as I see, I have some people showing up here. Remember, at any point, if you have a question, you can feel free to just jump right on over and just type in a question in the chat, and I will certainly help you. So today we're going to talk about Units 3 and 4. So I'm going to start with Unit 3 here. Unit 3 is the unit that discusses absolutism and constitutionalism, okay, the rise of these two things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is absolutism, and we will start over in France, which was probably the most absolute of all of these areas, initially highlighted by King Louis XIII and his main right-hand man, the Cardinal Richelieu. And some would argue that Richelieu was the guy that really was running the show from behind the scenes. But regardless of what our interpretation of that is, what we have here is that Louis XIII, under his reign, specifically, they were doing things to strengthen the power of the monarchy. So they were limiting the power of the nobles. They were starting to tax and control the nobles more. They put down any revolutions that they had to put down. They tried to strengthen the economy as well under various kind of open trade policies and stuff like that. And again, centralized power to try to basically end feudalism forever. And then that, of course, would really be achieved by Louis XIV. When we look at Louis XIV, you know, he was the state, or his famous quote, "I am the state." He was a complete autocrat. There was no doubt who was in charge. He, for instance, would repeal the Edict of Nantes, which would get rid of religious freedoms in France, which would be some issues later on in history as a result of that. Forcibly saying, no, we are Catholic, and that is how this is going to go. He really focused on taxation, making sure that nobles and all people were paying taxes. He would expand trade. He builds canals so that we can get better transportation of goods. But really, in the end, it was all the power was revolving around him, hence his title, the Sun King, as well. All nobles were answerable to him. He could raise you up to a higher level of noble. He could get rid of you. He made all these elaborate ceremonies, like being in the room when he woke up, helping to clothe him and stuff. And by doing that, by controlling everything, it really put the nobles at a distinct disadvantage. He was going to increase the standing army. So again, it's loyal to France and not to him. And he's going to go on a bunch of wars. He fights wars for 30 or so odd years of his reign. The War of Spanish Succession is probably the big one that ends up breaking him. But he really strove to put France in a position of centralized power in Europe. Now, the downside is he spent stupid amounts of money to do that. He spent stupid amounts of money to build Versailles. And in building Versailles, he also removed the monarch from Paris and really the area where people were. And that's going to be a negative because his successors will lose touch. The economics that he strove so hard to build, he will basically undermine them, and really does help to set up the conditions that will result in the French Revolution. Over there, let's start with so after Charles V, or before he dies, he's going to split his empire up. One side is going to get more of the area centered around Austria and Eastern Europe and parts of Germany, and then the other side is going to be split up, which will be Spain, the Netherlands, and the New World. And that will go to his son, Philip. Philip is an interesting character, very focused on death all the time, wore black all the time. He slept in a morgue. He was kind of creepy, but he was hyper religious. It is underneath him that the Dutch Wars of Independence occur, and that the Dutch will gain their, or at least the Protestant Dutch will gain their independence, which will really hurt him economically. He also attempts to invade England to get rid of Elizabeth in the ill-fated Armada attack of 1588. Excuse me. However, Spain will increase their holdings in the New World and consolidate that during his term in the 1500s. They will also conquer the Philippines during this time, so that expands their power. The famed Spanish galleons could be found everywhere, transporting silver and gold back from the areas that they had conquered. And Spain is kind of at its height underneath Philip. Now, eventually, under his successors, like the third, the fourth, it will fall apart. They will have massive economic problems. But at least here in the 16th century, they're doing pretty well. On the other end of it, we have the Holy Roman Empire, what would be left of the Holy Roman Empire. And part of that will see during this time the rise of the state of Brandenburg, Prussia, which will later be known as Prussia. And that is mainly due to King Fred, or he's more of a prince at this time, but Prince Frederick William the Great, and he is really going to focus on expanding the Prussian military, which will become one of the greatest militaries in the world. He is going to control the nobles, and Prussia is what really is eventually going to get us a united Germany. I think many people could argue that without the development of Prussia, that I don't know that we actually get the creation of Germany at some point. I mean, we might have, but Prussia was really the driving factor. And this is the part where they really start to kind of leak out of the Holy Roman Empire. What's left of the Holy Roman Empire is mainly left to Charles's brother, Ferdinand. So he will be Emperor Ferdinand and his family, still continuing all the way down. And they will tend to focus on the area of Austria. And really, it's going to be Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, a lot of the Balkans, in and out. This is going to kind of become the new center of power and eventually just be referred to as Austria. They, again, will rule pretty much just strict rule by decree. But something to keep an eye out on here is the issue of ethnic groups. Austria is going to have multiple ethnic groups that don't necessarily like being ruled by the Habsburgs and just the Austrians. The other issue that you're going to have here is many of the people, particularly those in Czechoslovakia, or modern-day Czech Republic and Slovakia, will be Protestant, and here the Austrians are going to be Catholic. And so between religious and ethnic differences, it's going to take a toll over time. Now, of course, Austria-Hungary really doesn't finally fall apart until, after World War I, but it's going to be an issue that they have a lot moving forward. In Scandinavia, we also have some things rising up. You have the rise of Denmark that actually does pretty well for itself, fights in the 30 Years' War, and develops an elected monarchy. So that's kind of interesting. Hi, Jilly. This is for AP Euro, but you're more than. Oh no, hi. Oh, Jilly. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Jilly. Jillian. I'm mixing you up with somebody else, but hi. Sorry, my bad. Got distracted there. I have another Jillian this year. That's Jillian from last year. So we've got the big power in the north, though, is going to be Sweden. Under King Gustavus Adolphus, who unfortunately does die in the 30 Years' War. But he is really able to establish Sweden as a power, particularly in the north. They go to war with Russia a lot. But they're going to conquer all of Sweden, all of Finland, some of Norway, Estonia, and Latvia at their height. They're going to be really, really strong in that way. He's really going to strengthen power. Okay, I appreciate that. Take care, Jillian. I hope all is going well for you this year. He is going to really, for 100 years or so, they're going to be a major player. They control a lot of trade in the Baltic, and so another empire that kind of rises at this time. Also, we have the development of the Netherlands. As I mentioned, they are able to break free from Spain and really go on an economic run. They are going to really focus on their navy and economics. They're going to have a tremendous navy under the various princes of Orange. Of course, Prince William of Orange is going to really be the main guy here. They are going to, again, develop naval ships like the Fluid. You're going to have the rise of the Bank of Amsterdam, as Amsterdam is one of the main financial centers in Europe, where people get loans and do business from. And eventually it is through here that the development of the Dutch East India Company, which at its height will be one of the most powerful corporations really in history, to the point where they have like their own army and navy. So the Dutch establishing this freedom. And, you know, this is going to be an area that, you know, many of them there are Protestant, but they're going to, you know, really focus on religious freedoms, trying not to persecute people, which is kind of good. The business owners are going to have a lot of power here, very similar to Florence during the Renaissance. And this is kind of a little bit of a different monarchy here. Poland at this time will also reach its kind of height and eventual fall. For a while under Prince Jagiello, they are going to combine with Lithuania and create the nation of Poland-Lithuania, which at that point, the combination of the two areas, which actually also includes a lot of modern-day Ukraine, they're going to be one of the largest countries in Europe. And they're going to have a pretty good run. But eventually, it's government issues that are going to be its downfall. After the last Jagiello king dies and there's no heir, the legislature that develops here, so a little bit of constitutional, known as the Sejm or the Sejm, I'm not sure, it's S-E-J-M, is going to basically help form them into a commonwealth with a full parliament in the year 1569. And then the parliament's really going to start to focus on trying to pull power away from the kings, which they are able to successfully do. And then eventually they will start naming foreign nationals king and not people from Poland, Lithuania. You start to get lots of gridlock, and then they're not really able to develop economically. And eventually, because of their location, the Russians, the Russians, and the Austrians are really eyeing up this land. And eventually, in the 1700s, Poland will be completely overrun. And it will be about 200 years before the country of Poland is created again, until after World War I. England, the big thing, or actually, let's talk with the last monarchy here, and of course that is going to be the Russians. When we start here in the Russians, you got to remember, and under Prince Ivan III of Moscow, they are going to be able to kind of drive out the Mongols. Ivan III gets a coalition of people that are there to resist them, and they actually show up in a big show of force. The Mongols decide that they don't want to fight or deal with this, and they actually leave. So they're actually able to win without fighting. And it is this time that Ivan takes, one, the moniker of the Great, but two, becomes known as the Tsar. And this, of course, will be the main position from this point in the 1300s all the way until 1917, when Nicholas II abdicates. Now, he will be followed by Ivan III, who unfortunately, had a good start and not so good end. Initially, he helps to build the power of the Tsar. He will expand continually out from Moscow and moving into modern-day Ukraine and starting to push westward as well. But unfortunately, Ivan was very mentally unstable. He had an incident in which he beat his daughter-in-law, causing her to have a miscarriage, and then got into an argument about it with his son, and then he killed his son, and that just kind of broke him mentally. He then proceeded to just torture the people of Russia, insulate himself, put people at each other's throats. And then when he died, basically everything just fell apart because there was no heir. And so you have a dynastic war that goes on. And coming out of that war, you get Michael Romanov as the new czar. And Michael Romanov's family will rule this area for 300 plus years. Now, Michael will reconsolidate power of the czar. He will focus again in and around Moscow, but he has massive success conquering. It is under Michael Romanov that the Russians really just start to make their big push toward the Pacific, and Russia becomes one of the largest countries in the world. It is, of course, then it is his successor, Peter, that is the guy that really takes Russia to the next heights. And mainly because Peter felt, and kind of rightfully so, that Russia was seen as a backwater, that it wasn't respected, and that people didn't want to come there. And they were behind as far as economically, technologically. As a young man, he journeys to the West, supposedly under disguise, but he was like 7 feet tall, so everybody kind of knew who he was anyway. But he gets a good sense of what needed to be done in order to have success, and starts to radically change Russia. He built a grand capital of Russia, which of course he will name St. Petersburg after himself, so that he can have access to the Baltic Sea. He goes to war with places like Sweden, and will come out on the positive side of that and expand land and control. He is going to open an Academy of the Sciences, and from this point on, Russian scientists will achieve quite a lot over the course of history, and still do today. Really focus on trade, building a navy. Russia didn't even have a navy at this point. Now they're going to have a navy. And really focus on westernization, trying to get the Western nations of Europe to look at them as an equal, as a trading partner. The most infamous thing, of course, is him cutting off the beards of the nobles, but dressing like Western Europe, having music and art. You get the building of incredible things. Well, this was before Peter, but the building of, St. Basil's Cathedral, and Russia really starting to modernize. It's going to take a while to catch up, to be honest. I mean, it'll go in and out. Under Peter, it's really good. They'll kind of fall back in. Then Catherine the Great, she's going to take it back up to another notch, and then they'll kind of fall back again. And then you get the ins and outs. But it is Peter that starts the road to Russia being a European power and starting to try to become a player as a world power, which, of course, they eventually will and are today. Finally, though, we do have England, and England goes in the different direction, right? They start with absolutism under, say, King Henry VII and King Henry VIII, who I've kind of already talked about in the previous video. But it's really under Elizabeth, even though that she was a strong central monarch and she created things like the Book of Central Prayer, or the Book of Common Prayer, I'm sorry. It's her actively working with Parliament that really starts to get Parliament power. I mean, sure, that goes all the way back to the Magna Carta, but you need to actually use things that are put down in what's the word I want to look for? In writing, right? So she really starts to work with them. Parliament is controlling money. They're doing a variety of things, but it's really what ends up happening with her successors. You have James I and then Charles I. James I, not the greatest of guys, but it's really under Charles that things start to dramatically fall apart, resulting in the famous English Civil War. And mainly that was because of the rise of Parliament and Parliament trying to exercise their rights and their power, and Charles I trying to prevent that. And you had a variety of things that happened, but that eventually led to the Civil War. And it's in the Civil War that Oliver Cromwell comes to prominence, because it is indeed the parliamentary forces that will have the victory. They are able to get a hold of Charles, who was actually captured by the Scots and handed over to them, and he is executed. I mean, again, always a big deal if a king is executed. Now, Oliver Cromwell was a fascinating figure. He does expand English control into Northern Ireland and basically sets up the issues between Ireland and Northern Ireland today, actively discriminates against the Irish. But the thing that he was really focused on is he did not want to be a king. He did not want to be a monarch. He actually only would allow himself to be called the Lord Protector of England, and really focused on trying to bring England into being what he wanted to do, which was bring it into a democracy. The problem is that most people weren't 100% ready for that. And his heavy-handedness with a lot of things kind of rubbed people the wrong way. When he dies, his son's kind of disposed of pretty quick. And then we go back to King Charles II, who will start to work with Parliament a lot more. But again, it starts to fall apart under King James II because he's a Catholic and he doesn't try to hide being a Catholic, tries to refuse to work. So Parliament finds his daughter, Mary, who had married Prince William of Orange over in the Netherlands. And then they get, in the early 1600s, we have the Glorious Revolution, in which you have the invasion, James runs, and William and Mary take control of England. Now, what's really important here is, again, they will once more ratify the powers of Parliament. Parliament controls money, taxation, stuff like that. That they will also create the position of the Prime Minister, who is the de facto head of Parliament, who, of course, now runs the country, and that will be a slow assumption of power over time, that by about the early 1900s, like after Queen Victoria, the king will, the prime minister will pretty much run the show. And they will also create the English Bill of Rights. And this is really, really important. I mean, much of the American Bill of Rights is based off of this stuff. It's really, really successful. And, things like no cruel and unusual punishments. Everybody has the right to a solid defense, innocent until proven guilty. You have the right to a lawyer. All of these types of things were really, really important and would be very influential, not only in the United States eventually, but in other areas of Europe as well. All right, so that kind of rounds up what was going on in government. And the other big thing is to understand really the development of capitalism at this time, with economic plans. Yes, mercantilism is still the big thing. The idea of trying to find closed loops and really dealing as much as you possibly can with hard currency and gold and silver. But eventually markets get saturated and things kind of fall apart. And with early capitalism, we get the beginnings of a variety of things during this particular time period. Again, the very late 1500s into the 1600s. You're looking at joint stock companies, in which, the beginning of the eventual stock market, that people go in together to finance organizations and they get a cut of the profits. They become incredibly, incredibly popular. The development of insurance companies to protect against, loss. We have the role of banks, for instance, the Bank of England and the Bank of Amsterdam, as lending institutions and financiers to businesses and merchants. You also have labor, because we've talked about this. I talked about this before, the Age of Discovery, but of course you do have the development of the triangular trade and slavery, as well as things like indentured servitude. That the agricultural boom that was going on in the New World needed labor. Of course, one of the main ways was the kidnapping of the Africans and forced into servitude there. I already discussed the horrors of that. But then you also have the development of indentured servitude, which was a way that people could, say, move to the Americas and work for someone for a certain amount of years and then eventually gain their freedom. But really, agriculture is at the center of things. However, we do get early industry, what we call the cottage industry or the putting out system. And so it was not uncommon that you would get a bunch of fabric given to someone in their home, and they would create shirts or dresses, and their job would to be make a certain amount, and then they would give it to the merchant, who would then turn around and sell it. Eventually, the cottage system will change into you will start to gather those people all in one area, and that's eventually where we're going to get the factory. We also have the development of, early, interchangeable parts, like Eli Whitney from over in the United States is really, really important for that. They also use them for guns and the cotton gin. And so when we're starting to see that development of the value of manufactured goods, because again, agriculture is still king, but what the Europeans are realizing is that Finnish agriculture good or Finnish manufactured goods bring you more money. And that's what starts to really become incredibly valuable. All right, and so that's basically Unit 3 in a nutshell. Those are the major topics and ideas that you need to make sure you look at your notes, or again, can always look at my videos as I shamelessly plug myself. Now, Unit 4 is a pretty big unit here. So what I think I'm going to do today is, well, you know what? I'll start with Unit 4. We'll see, because I don't want these videos to go too long because you might not watch them so much. So I might come back tomorrow and do the second part of it, which I think I'm going to lean towards. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over the scientific revolution. And then tomorrow I'll hop back on probably in the middle of the day. I'm going to hop on like 2, 3 o'clock. I'll come on. I will complete Unit 4. And that will be primarily the Enlightenment and then the nations and the political situations in the Enlightenment, particularly getting into 18th century Europe. So let's talk about the scientific revolution. And this is really, one of the most important things that have ever happened in European and world history. The influence of the European scientists, particularly in the 17th and early 18th century, cannot be understated. I mean, our view of the world, basic laws of physics, mathematics, medicine, all of these advances are really tremendous at this time. Okay. And of course, we have the influence of the Renaissance, the gathering of this old knowledge and the reintroduction of this knowledge. You have huge Muslim influences because a lot of the work, particularly in medicine, that the Muslim areas were doing were so huge, and those books were starting to get over to Europe now, and it gave them something to build on. And the big thing about the Europeans is that they look at all of this old knowledge, and one, they embrace it, but two, they start to say, okay, is it right? And can we improve upon it? And so that's exactly what happens in the scientific revolution. The idea is to improve and change and understand how the world works, to prove things mathematically. That's going to be very important. And the really key thing here that I have to stress is the influence of one Francis Bacon, because we really credit Francis Bacon with the development of the scientific method. And that's how science works today. And that is the best way, right? You develop a hypothesis, you design experiments, you catalog your observations, and then you determine, was your hypothesis right or not? And then what have you learned from this experiment? And that process from Francis Bacon is so huge, and it really dominates, science for the rest of history. So who are the big, the other big thing here is science just becomes cool, just like art was cool and architecture was cool. Scientists are big name people. They're really popular. I really wish that was the case today, but what can you do? As a result, you have the development of scientific societies, things like the English Royal Society, the French Royal Academy of the Sciences. These are things that really prop science up. They help to spread their information. They also work to get people salaried and pensioned. In other words, like being a scientist is an actual job that you can make money and a living off of, which is really, really important. They can really rise to preeminence. For instance, Johann Kepler had the title of imperial mathematician of the Holy Roman Empire. That's kind of rad. Isaac Newton was made a knight. So, there's a prestige to this science. And of course, what's really important, once again, we go back to our friend Johann Gutenberg, because all this knowledge was able to be shared. The fact of the matter is that these guys wrote papers, they wrote books, those things got published, and they could see what they did. Okay, can I improve upon it? Can I change it? So you got the ideas that, say, Galileo puts forth, and then Newton reads that and says, I don't know, maybe let's see what's going on. And then, or like Kepler reads Copernicus's stuff and says, okay, this is mostly right, but maybe I can fix it up, which he does. And then in the future, guys like Einstein looks at what Newton did and said, okay, this and this is good, but this is a problem. Let me see if I can fix it. And that's really the glory of science. All right, so who are the core guys that we have here? So who do we need to know about? First and foremost, Nicholas Copernicus. He is earlier than the rest of these folks. His book just inspires so many scientists. It ruffles so many feathers, and it is so right. And it's so transformational because it actually makes us question our place in the universe. You know, everybody is humming along gleefully on our globe planet because, yes, the planet is a globe, and everybody back then thought so. That's just, I had to get it out. But we go from this belief that we are the center of the universe, the center of everything, and now we're not. And that's pretty tremendous for his work that he did. Then coming after him, Johann Kepler looks at that and realizes there's some issues and things that they need to tweak to really make sure it's right. And he applies mathematics to understand and change that the orbits around the sun aren't circles, they're ellipses. And then he develops the laws of planetary motion, which are really, really important. And then coming after him, we of course have Galileo, who really works a lot on experimentation. He understands the telescope and he builds the best telescopes. So he understands the phases of Venus. He sees sunspots. He discovers all these moons around Jupiter. And of course, and much of his work actually helps to prove everything Copernicus was writing as well. And of course, his famous trial with the church kind of rose him to fame and made a lot of other scientists kind of look at that and say, no, we're going to keep doing this work no matter what. But the titan here, and you can't get away from it, is Isaac Newton. The entire world changed because of Isaac Newton. Okay. You look at the laws of motion. Then he developed the laws of optics, which are huge. Then we have gravity, which is one of the four forces that govern the universe. And it was actually the first force that was truly understood and kind of discovered. And then we have calculus, which is the most important math that we have, that he basically did on a dare because people said he couldn't figure out a math to help properly calculate the true distance of like orbits and stuff. It's crazy. But it's remarkable because if you look at how humans have advanced, and I remember reading this somewhere, and I forget where I read it. I think I might have read it in the book The 100, which was a book that came out about the 100 most influential people in the world. And someone put it this way: if you took someone who was living in the year 100, 200, and took them up to the time of Galileo, they really didn't live much differently. They would recognize a lot of things. Or so up to the time of Newton. And if you look where, from Newton's time, look at where we've gone. I mean, we've literally gone to the moon and we're like flying helicopters on Mars now. And much of it is because of his understandings of gravity, his discussions on the laws of motion, as well as calculus to be able to calculate all of that. So it is tremendous. And then the other two guys here I want to talk about are doctors. Now, medicine is lagging behind. Look, it's going to take a long time until we get to like Louis Pasteur and germ theory and stuff like that. But two guys here are really important. One is Andreas Vesalius, who is actually given permission by his government to do dissections of humans, and he creates a book of anatomy, which is really, really important to understanding the human body. And then we have Paracelsus, who develops the microcosm and macrocosm theories of understanding the reactions of the body and how the body is basically a series of systems. And he also gets into kind of early epidemiology with the study of diseases. And of course, really the titan at this time is William Harvey. William Harvey, very much influenced by the great Muslim scholar Al-Razi, and he really fully puts together the discovery of the circulatory system. Al-Razi had much of the basics, and then kind of William Harvey is going to put it over the edge on how everything originates in the heart, how the blood is recycled, veins and capillaries. And he actually theorized capillaries because we didn't have microscopes, so he couldn't like see them, but he was like, okay, well, this stuff has to be here, and he was right. And so the transformation that comes in the world because of the scientific revolution is really unparalleled, and it just continues to grow. And if we look at it today, Europe is still a center of science today, and it's pretty impressive. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks a lot for coming today. That's going to wrap up this part. Like I said, I'm going to come back tomorrow, and I'm going to make a shorter version of kind of finish up, so we don't have like some super long review thing here. So hopefully that's going to help you with Unit 3 and early Unit 4. Tomorrow I will come back and we'll be discussing the rest of Unit 4 and getting us ready for that AP test coming up on June 2nd, okay? So I really want to thank everybody who came in today. Hey, Josh, what's up, buddy? Good to see you, man. So you guys can take care. And if you, again, have any questions, you can feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel and review this stuff so we can get ready for that test that's going to be in June, okay? All right, good to see everybody, and take care.